Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Enyegolu. Now, as you might have heard, the influential Nigerian highlife music star, producer and performer, Professor Sir Victor Uwaifo, has died at the age of 80. He first made his name writing, producing and performing highlife songs like Jeremy, a crucial track in the development and popularization of highlife music. By the late 60s and 70s, he was an enormous star, churning out songs like Guitar Boy with a more plucked and string-dominated sound, which helped him to expand his audience beyond West Africa and which brought him worldwide fame. Over the years, he's influenced a variety of artists from Nigeria, Ghana, and across Africa. The music industry has repeatedly recognized how much he's influenced not just the development of highlife, but Kwete, Kassa, Afro-rock, and Afrobeats. Well, in a moment, we'll look back at his remarkable life. But first, here he is as a younger man with a splendid guitar-driven instrumental rendition of his hit song, Jeremy. What a gifted man. Well, for more about the life and career of the music maestro, Sir Victor Uwaifo, I'm joined now in the studio by the international journalist and African affairs analyst Lindsay Barrett, and by the 1970s music impresario and journalist Tony Amadi, who wrote prolifically about Sir Victor Uwaifo. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Let me come to you first, Lindsay Barrett. You were close to him as a business partner at one stage and a friend. You spoke to him 2 weeks ago, I understand. What was the focus of your conversation?
Well, when we spoke 2 weeks ago, he had just discovered that I had some health challenges and he wanted to know if I was coming to Benin, which is not strange. He was always a Benin man. He was always very much based at home. And he seemed so healthy and vibrant. When I heard that he was gone, it was surprising.
Well, I have to say it was a shock to all of us. But you helped him set up his studio in his house in Benin, that amazing mansion he's got there with all the sculptures and all the. Of course, in addition to that, there's a music studio there.
Well, what had happened was I had returned from a visit to London in 1973, and he was setting up his studio, and I had wanted to set up a drama studio to make radio dramas, but it didn't work out. So I had bought a lot of Sony equipment And he came to my house, saw it, and took all.
You mean he just took it or you sold it?
No, I sold it to
Okay.
him, but for very little, for less than it cost me.
Yes.
You know.
Well,
And he told me he was going to stay in Benin. He had been living in Ibadan and Lagos before, and he had decided that he was going to record himself and stay at home. And that didn't surprise me really, because the most interesting thing about his music was that it was based on his traditions.
Absolutely.
From home. Joromi was actually, I wouldn't call it a folk tale, it's actually a story based on the history of Benin.
And what a proud history they've got there. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, but let me bring you in, Tony Amadi. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And of course, you were the one who introduced Arise News, and by extension myself, to Victor Uwaifo. And I'm hearing now anecdotally that Lindsay Barrett gave you his phone number, and then you then gave me his phone number. But the first time he came to Arise, he flew all the way from Benin for that interview, and you set that up.
Right.
So thank you. That was a remarkable moment in history.
Thank you so much.
And help us measure the power and the range of his contributions to African and Nigerian music, and how he burnished his reputation over the years. Because you wrote about him quite a lot, didn't you?
Yes. He's such a great guy. That when we met after a long time, bringing him to Arise, that interview really that we did, it took more than 6 months to get him
to agree.
I gave certain conditions and so on, which you gladly met. You know, forget all the official side of things, but you
we were able to get around all that.
We get around all that.
Right.
And then he turns up into Hilton, where Arise studio is, and it was marvelous.
Absolutely.
Absolutely marvelous.
I have to say that for me, I felt like I was in the presence of royalty. A bit like the way I feel that when I sit in front of yourself and Lindsay. Two people who seriously have done so much, given so much to the music, the journalistic world, the entertainment world, and so on and so forth. But Lindsay, clearly the end of an era. Is that a fair assessment? I mean, is this also the end, in a sense, of highlife music as it was performed by giants like Sir Victor Uwaifo?
Well, I should hope not. I hope that they have left a legacy that the younger ones will someday build on.
But the size of their contribution. I mean, they're younger people. We've introduced a few people, you know, interviewed them who are doing high life. But these people bestrode the stage, didn't they?
Yes.
Globally and nationally.
Well, what was particular, when I came to Nigeria in 1966, that's when Joromi was really hitting. And what struck me then was that although people like Victor Uwaifo had huge audiences that followed them almost habitually, they were creating something from nothing, from scratch. And frankly, when he brought out Joromi, it was a surprise even to the music world, because at that time, to go into African history, storytelling, to find a subject for a song that would become popular was unusual.
Absolutely.
But, you know, very interestingly, Victor was also a painter,
yeah,
he was. Sculptor.
We'll talk about all that in a minute.
He was a sculptor and so on. So he had a very universal view of
he was the all-round entertainer,
and he really wanted, you know.
Well, stay with us. We're going to come back and finish your thoughts there, but I've got to take a break. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we remember the life and remarkable career of the high life superstar Sir Victor Uwaifo. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview, where we speak to the newsmakers as well as ordinary people doing extraordinary things around the world and featuring the voices at the heart of the stories. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Now let's continue our look back at the remarkable life of Professor Sir Victor Uwaifo, MON, who's died at the age of 80. Along with his band, which at one stage included the likes of Sonny Okosun and his contemporaries, including Victor Laya and Stephen Osadebe, Sir Victor helped to spread the intoxicating music of highlife around the world. He would go on to pioneer the Akwete and Ekasa genres in the late 60s and early 70s, using both modern and traditional instruments from his home state of Edo and creating a hypnotic dance sound. Beyond highlife, his influence extended across different musical styles, including Afro rock and Afro beats. President Buhari spoke of his legacy of successes in many areas, including not just music, but academia and administration. But of himself, Victor Uwaifo said in an interview with Arise News that quite simply, the best is yet to come.
I believe one of my philosophies is that the best is yet to come. And every achievement leads to the other. It's as if I'm not satisfied with what I already achieved. And I also have another philosophy: don't waste my time. You know, I cannot stay idle at any point in time. I must keep moving. I like exploring and then to exploit explore areas and exploit what I have, and draw from the past to advance the future. So I keep going on and on until if I can get some satisfaction from one thing. You see, music is one aspect. There are certain things you cannot express in music. You have to go into another field, like the art.
That is true.
That will give me the full explanation for trying to unravel some things that are, not too clear.
Guitar boy there doing his thing. And with me in the studio, the international journalist and African affairs analyst Lindsay Barrett, and the 1970s music impresario and entertainment journalist Tony Amadi. Thank you for staying with us. And Lindsay, we apologize for interrupting you before we had to take a break, but we were talking about the incredible breadth of experience that he has. You were talking about the fact that he's not just a musician. His,
as he said
absolutely,
himself,
it goes beyond that, doesn't it?
Yes, he went to St. Gregory's legendary secondary school in Lagos, and when I first met him, he told me I should check all the other musicians, and none of them went to a school like his. I didn't know much then about the backgrounds of people. But Victor was always looking for something new to do. In his later years, he became a state commissioner, that's a minister.
Absolutely.
And as he put it, he was the only minister of the arts.
Well, he was pretty emphatic also that he's the only musician, not just in Nigeria, but around the world. Obviously, we can't authenticate or verify that, but he said that he was the only musician with a PhD.
Okay.
But if he's not the only one, he's certainly one of them, because he did have a PhD. I mean,
so it was interesting though that in his early music, like the Guitar Boy, he really was a popular musician.
Absolutely.
And he's a popular performer. He performed on stage in such a way. I remember when he came to Britain in, must have been in 1982 or so. He performed at the Institute of Contemporary Arts. And people were a bit, lost of how to take it, because Victor was performing like a rock and roll musician.
He kind of reminded me of Elvis Presley there, didn't he? Let me bring you in, Tony Amadi, because obviously you also encountered him and you wrote about him. How was he portrayed? I mean, I can see Lindsay talking about people getting a bit confused about whether he's a rock and roll star that plays highlife music. What was your experience?
One thing that helped his popularity stakes is that Victor, if he's doing a tour, it's going to be every day of the month. He comes into Lagos, he's going to do all the clubs, one after the other.
He had a lot of energy.
A lot of energy.
Sort of
the other top musicians wouldn't go to those clubs because they would consider them low or whatever. But Victor will go every inch of those places, like Lawanson, Surulere, all over the place. And by the time he finishes, everybody knows that a musician came to Lagos.
And of course, after he exploded onto the scene in the 1960s, by the late 60s, Nigeria had turned on itself with a civil war. I mean, you covered a lot of that, because I remember, I've read some of your things subsequently. I was in diapers, of course, at the time, but but I remember reading some of your material about the music, the people who had evolved, and you promoted a lot of those musicians.
Yes,
How did that affect or influence his music?
One of the things that happened to Victor was the Ghanaian highlife people were the ones dominating the scene at that time. And Victor came from nowhere, hit Joromi. They could not manage it. The others, top musicians like, those great Stan Plange and all those guys, E.T. Mensah, they were dominating. And the way you measure this thing is, there is the University of Ibadan. They have their annual event, Havana. Havana is a big social event run by the students. The musicians that come there are the top. And the Ghanaians topped it all the way until Victor came. Hit with his Jerome and other type people who could not understand. And when he came to Havana, they could not stop him. Every year they kept bringing him back. So he became so popular and so creative. In fact, it's difficult to actually find a more creative musician of his era.
It's brilliant just listening to both of you taking us back to an extraordinary period of Nigeria's history. Absolutely essential that those histories are preserved for the future and for posterity, if nothing else for the contribution that people like him made to the world. Clearly a man who was at the cutting edge of his profession, Lindsay. But beyond that, I mean, because we're talking kind of outside of him, what was it in your analysis that made him so remarkable? Because it's a combination of his talent as well as his personality, wasn't it?
Well, an interesting thing is, I think Victor first hearing the new popular music of the period, he wanted that kind of energy in local music. An interesting thing about him, he was always inventing something. He invented
that is true.
A percussion instrument made from bamboo. And then another thing was, if you look at his band, Sonny Okosun wasn't the only featured pop star that worked with him. And he had a family of people who believed in him as a star, and they always seemed to be following him. But at the same time, he was trying to make a music that was local and yet universal. That was the beauty of. When I first heard Joromia, I was completely blown away because I had just come to Nigeria and I had not heard high life like this. I thought I knew what high life was. High life sounded like calypso, but this was something entirely new. And then when you ask, what is Joromia about? They tell you that it's from the history of Benin. Say, who is this man?
And of course, Tony, he then moved, as Lindsay said, very inventive, always looking for something, a way to take things forward. It was almost like a dialectical process, wasn't it? There would be point, counterpoint, result, and then based on that result, he would develop something new. And you had things like Akwete and Ekasa and all of that, taking the music to another stage. And importantly, as Lindsay pointed out, infusing it with as much of his traditional Benin music as possible.
Yes. One of the great things about Victor is his quality. Everything he does is quality. He dresses up quality.
Look at his hair.
I remember
brilliant, isn't it?
I was driving him to the airport.
Not a strand out of shape.
I was taking him to the airport, and with your car, I suppose.
Yes, yes.
I took him back to the airport, and it was like I was just imagining what this guy has done, and I was in the car with him, with your driver.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
And this was a huge personality. And you know what? He was always. He picked about 7 gold medals, the very first in Africa, in fact.
With gold records.
Gold records, yes. You know,
I think he had 12 in all.
Probably more. You know.
Jeremy, I think, was the first.
Yeah,
Jeremy was the first. Guitar Ball was the second,
Yeah.
and then he had a gold record for a record that became popular in Congo. It was the most popular record among the musicians in the Congo.
Amazing, isn't it?
No, Victor is, calling him great man is just an understatement, because he has done so many great things. Of course, he also was the first Nigerian to be given MON, that is
member of the Order of
the Niger, because the government became so impressed with all the things he was doing. The country's name was going everywhere because of the music he was playing, and they gave him the first medal.
But I mean, to be fair, in his case, he made quite a bit of money, though, didn't he? Because I mean, he had these lovely vintage cars.
Well, if you see his house in Benin, I mean, he bought over a whole quarter of what's it called, the Kemwa Road or something like that.
Well, actually, where he was on, they changed the name of the street to him. It became Victor Uwaifo Road or Street or something. Yeah.
I also think that if this government of the state, I'm talking of the governor who was, yes,
Obaseki.
Yes. One of the things he could do is negotiate with the family, buy up that place, and make it
a museum of some sort.
Because many people will be coming from all over the world to see where.
Yes. It'll become a shrine of sorts. Please stay with us. We want to talk with you a little bit more. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our retrospective of the celebrated life and career of the high life superstar Sir Victor Uwaifo. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Enyegolu. Now, after more than 6 decades at the top of the music industry in Nigeria, Professor Sir Victor Uwaifo has stepped out of the light forever. His musical achievements are legendary, and he's written some of the most well-known high life songs of all time. And it is safe to say that he continues to influence hundreds of thousands of people every day. This month, as the legendary guitar boy clocks out at the age of 80, although he never looked a day over 60, there's almost too much to say about the way he influenced highlife and other African music genres. And that brought him world-renowned fame, as much for his enormous contributions to the evolution of modern African music as for his quite incredible, inventive on-stage performances. He was certainly one of the most important figures in Nigerian and African music. And with me in the studio, two people who knew Sir Victor Uwaifo personally and professionally, the international journalist and African affairs analyst Lindsay Barrett, and the 1970s music impresario and entertainment journalist Tony Amadi. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for staying with us. And to you, Lindsay, we know his contributions to the past in terms of music. Let's look forward. Where might his music and his art be heading going forward?
Well, one of the things I must say about Victor, he was devoted to very adventurous instrumentation. And if some of the younger people take on that spirit, it would help. He really believed that you should be an expert at instrumentation. And he tried, as I've said before, to invent instruments. He was always inventing a new instrument. There's a percussion instrument he invented, I think he called it the bambophone or something. And another thing we must remember, he was a multi-instrumentalist.
Yeah, he was.
He was a flute player,
Yep.
very brilliant flute player, flute solo player, as well as a dynamic guitarist.
Absolutely.
But he always tried to have his band very well trained. That's something that I hope the younger ones will learn from him.
Well, I mean, I suppose it's the end of the era of these very decisive front men. I mean, you had the likes of, he preceded, I suppose, Fela Kuti, but you had the likes of himself, Fela Kuti, Victor Laya,
Chicago and others.
yeah, I mean, Osadebe. Before that era, you had Bobby Benson, very strong sort of front men, didn't you? I guess the best way, Tony, to console ourselves over such a huge loss is to look for a glimmer of hope. I mean, do you see that in perhaps the way his music continues to influence musicians all across Africa today?
Yeah, somebody told me today, said that he created enough memories to outlive time.
That's a good one.
I read that and realized that this is true. Because this guy is really enormous. And he was very careful. He always looked forward to how would he be remembered when he goes. That's why he kept on emphasizing he's a poet, he's a philosopher, he's a sculptor, what do you call it?
Yeah.
And I began to realize that the education he had at Yaba laid the whole foundation for him. Because with that education, he wasn't thinking about music, but he now got into music and used that education he had to now crystallize and
right. But I mean, you're a newspaper man. You also, of course, evolved into television. I mean, how is he being remembered in Nigeria? Lots of tributes, I guess. There's one from Buhari. There's one from the governor of Edo State, Obaseki. I've seen stuff from T-Mac and all that. All these musicians, politicians, everybody, basically.
in fact, the whole internet is all about Victor. I got this on my phone early Saturday or Sunday, and then you are interviewed. Somebody was already telling me that you ran an interview with Victor. I thought it was the one we organized when I was here, but you did two more, which I didn't know.
No, one more, not
Okay,
two more.
one more.
Yeah.
And all this was really the intensity was really high. Everywhere in Nigeria, people know him. People you don't even expect still remember him because he's unforgettable.
And Lindsay, you're just along the theme of gauging the public's response to his passing, what's your sense of how he's being remembered in Nigeria and beyond? I mean, a huge figure from the past and present.
Well, one of the things is that we will always hear his music. A whole generation of older people know his music from their youth, but a lot of younger people also know his music because it was so contemporary always. And as a result, they say when you die, that's when people remember you. So I think gradually his passing will cause people to question. And that
actually, a quick point of correction. Tony, you were right. I interviewed him 3 times, not twice. The pictures we're just seeing on television, that was in this one. This was at the Calabar Festival. Right. That was not for Arise News. I had come to cover the festival, and I had met him and convinced him to sit down and have an interview with me. That was the first time I ever met him. So that's a remarkable piece of footage, and congratulations to Rita there, the producer, for dragging that out from wherever she got it from. But I mean, just turning to you, Tony, he influenced so many people. I mean, apart from us, you know, the likes of Fela Kuti, on the international scene, Osibisa. I mean, I remember Teddy Osei telling me repeatedly about Victor Uwaifo. And of course, a lot of young contemporary Afrobeats musicians today have made reference to him. In that regard, who would you point to as the creative offspring, if you like, of Victor Uwaifo today? Or they're too numerous to mention, basically.
Well, they're numerous, but there's a name that you cannot miss. And he appeared with him there on the Sonny Okotu. Sonny Okotu learned so much about Victor and his style that he too, at a point, was looking bigger than even the Victor. But obviously, Victor's own background and style and
was
quality
slightly different.
Is totally different. So it's amazing.
Yes, but as a person, I mean, Lindsay, because you knew him personally, he's often been referred to as difficult to work with by some and easygoing perfectionist by others. Did it just mean that he knew his own mind and was pretty set on what he wanted and he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted? And we've got a minute before we have to finish.
That's a very good analysis of who Victor was. He was very self-confident, almost conceited, but he knew what
almost, but not quite.
No, I wouldn't say he was conceited because his achievements really matched his
absolutely the size of his ego. But he didn't wear his ego on his sleeve, which is something to be said.
Even if he did, he proved his point. I went to visit him once when he was state minister, commissioner, and I remember he had about 7 policemen you had to pass through to get.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit like him. And I have to say that on that bucolic note, I want to thank you exceedingly, Lindsay Barrett, and you, Tony Amadi. Thank you very much indeed for sharing your memories with us. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.